Okay, so this one starts in the dumbest way possible. I was drunk on a Wednesday. Not fun drunk. Not party drunk. Just that kind of quiet, low simmer buzz where you're sitting on your floor in a pile of laundry, eating leftover General Tso's chicken out of the box, and your brain goes, screw it. Let's see what's out there. Against my better judgment, I reactivated my Hinge profile. Again, for maybe the fourth time that year. I'd deleted it before, swearing off dating apps like they were the root of all my issues. And maybe they were, or maybe I was just tired of meeting people who smiled without showing teeth or used the word sapiosexual in their bio like it was some kind of flex. Either way, I was back. Sitting there in sweats that hadn't seen daylight in 3 days, scrolling through strangers like I was auditioning them for a part one didn't actually have the script for. And then Alira popped up. Her profile didn't scream anything unusual. No bikini pics. No wild travel photos. Her photos were warm-toned, grainy, like they were taken on film. Not in that try-hard, vintage-obsessed way. More like she actually had a camera with real buttons and didn't need apps to make her life look poetic. In one picture, she was sitting cross-legged on a rooftop, wind blowing her hair across her face. In another, she was holding a cup of tea with chipped nail polish and a chipped front tooth you could only see if you looked close. That tooth. I remember it. It stayed in my head. Her prompts were honest. Not too curated. Not the usual looking for someone to go on adventures with, or I'm fluent in sarcasm crap. One said, I like long walks, but I hate when people turn them into metaphors. I laughed. Another said, I journal every morning and want someone who doesn't think emotional honesty is a threat. That one hit me like a sucker punch. Not because I disagreed, but because I didn't realize how badly I wanted that too. We started chatting that night and didn't stop. I was supposed to wake up early the next day, but we talked until 3 a.m. Her messages weren't flirty. Not in the usual sense. They were probing. Not invasive, just intentional. She asked about moments that shaped me. Asked what my worst decision was and whether I regretted it or just couldn't stop thinking about it. She didn't ask what I did for work or what my favorite movie was. She asked what my biggest fear was on a silent Sunday afternoon. And I told her. I told her things I probably shouldn't have. I told her about my dad's divorce, about the fight I had with my best friend 3 years ago that still makes my chest tighten when I think about it. I told her how I used to cry during talent shows in middle school because I was afraid of being average. Like really average. Like invisible. It wasn't just emotional dumping. She shared too. She told me about a time she got cheated on and started believing it was because she wasn't intense enough. That word kept coming up with her, intense. She said she was trying to unlearn the idea that passion had to hurt. That love didn't have to feel like bleeding. We met up 2 weeks later at this little cafe that served lavender mochas and had mismatched furniture. She walked in wearing an oversized hoodie with a faded university logo and jeans that dragged at the hem, frayed and a little damp from the rain. She looked like someone who hadn't dressed for a date, just for the day. And somehow, that made her more beautiful than any filtered photo. She looked alive. That's the best way I can put it. We talked for 5 hours. No exaggeration. We sat, sipped, wandered to a park, laid in the grass, and talked about dreams, not goals, actual dreams. She told me she once dreamt of floating down a street made of hands. I told her I have a recurring dream where I'm underwater and my phone rings, and I answer it, even though that makes no sense. She said that meant I was afraid of being reached when I'm vulnerable. I said maybe I just need to upgrade my dream plan. We kept seeing each other after that. Not constantly, but enough. She wasn't clingy, but she was consistent. Every morning, she'd send me a song, a quote, or a weird memory. She remembered everything I said. Everything. She asked if I ever wanted to be a dad. She asked what scared me most about commitment. She once asked if I thought my kindness was a shield. I said yes, and I meant it. But I hadn't thought about it like that until she asked. I was into her. Not just in a this girl is cool kind of way, but in the I want to show you my old drawings from when I was 13 and thought I'd be an artist kind of way. I wanted to put her in my past, even though she was brand new. She made me feel known. And unless you've gone years without that, you don't realize how addictive it is. Then it got weird. It started with a video. Someone sent me a link on Instagram from a burner account. No followers. No posts. Just a message. You need to watch this. I clicked it. It was a screen recording of a YouTube video titled, The Soft Ones, how emotional grooming hides in plain sight. The voiceover was some guy talking over screenshots, text bubbles, audio clips. Halfway through, I heard my own voice. A voice note I'd sent to Alira. I said something like, "Sometimes I wonder if I'm only good at being vulnerable because it keeps people close." Then came the screenshots. My messages. Cropped, highlighted, dissected. Labeled with terms like empathy bait and emotional manipulation pattern 2A. I felt like I was watching a documentary about myself, but one where I was the villain. In the comments under the video, there was an account with Alira's profile picture. Not her name, but her face. And she was replying to people. Saying, "This one was difficult." I almost believed him too. Another reply said, "We need more awareness of these tactics." I scrolled through the channel. Dozens of videos. Each one about a different guy. All framed like exposés. Some were clearly bad, actual abusers, cheaters, manipulators. But others? They just sounded sad. Lost. Tender in the wrong ways. I was one of them. Eventually I figured it out. The guy narrating the videos? Her husband. They had a whole brand built around this. Alira would go on dating apps, find emotionally open men, push them into revealing things, gather voice notes and texts, and then send them to her husband for analysis. Together, they'd frame it as fieldwork. As if intimacy were a crime scene. As if vulnerability was evidence. They had merch. A Patreon. A podcast. I tried messaging her. Blocked. I tried emailing. Nothing. I spiraled. For weeks. I stopped eating. I deleted all my accounts. I reread every text we sent. I tried to figure out what was real and what was bait. Was she ever into me? Did she ever really laugh at my dumb jokes? Was it always a script? The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the comments. Strangers dissecting my personality. Saying I sounded manipulative. That I was dangerous. That my softness was a Trojan horse. That I didn't deserve trust. Some of them found my full name. Found my old tweets. My LinkedIn. My college blog. They posted it. Mocked it. I had to shut everything down. One night, I sat on my bed with my phone in one hand and a bottle of whiskey in the other, rereading a comment that said, "You can tell this guy is a textbook narcissist. Watch how he uses childhood trauma to create sympathy." That comment was under a clip where I talked about my dad not saying, "I love you," growing up. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat there. Hollow. Dating in the modern world is a series of adventures, mishaps, and awkward moments, all wrapped in the hope of finding someone who makes the chaos worthwhile. Tinder, in particular, has a way of turning your expectations on their head. One minute you're swiping and chatting, imagining the fun you'll have, and the next, life throws you a curveball you didn't see coming. That's exactly what happened to me when I met this guy. Let's call him Tinder Guy. Not the most creative nickname, but it suits the story. We hit it off immediately after matching. He was funny, charming, and had this easygoing vibe that made him stand out from the usual Tinder crowd. Our first 2 dates were genuinely a lot of fun. I hadn't really been looking for anything serious, but with him, it felt like there was potential. We laughed a lot, had great conversations, and I felt comfortable around him, which isn't always the case on Tinder dates. By the time our 3rd date rolled around, I was pretty into him. Like really into him. I decided I wanted to take things to the next level. He planned the 3rd date, and it was perfect. He took me to this cute little Italian restaurant that had candles on the tables and dim lighting. The whole romantic setup. We shared a bottle of wine, split a tiramisu for dessert, and everything just felt right. I knew by the time we were halfway through the main course that I wanted to sleep with him that night. And honestly, I thought he might feel the same way. After dinner, he invited me back to his place for another glass of wine, and I didn't hesitate for a second. His apartment was nice, clean, cozy, and full of little personal touches that made it feel like more than just a bachelor pad. He poured us each a glass of red wine, and we settled onto his couch. The conversation flowed as easily as it had all night, and before long we were kissing. At first, it was great. He was a good kisser, and it felt natural, not forced or awkward. But then, the kissing just kept going. Fully clothed, making out on the couch, for what felt like an eternity. I'm not exaggerating when I say it lasted forever. At first, I was into it, but after a while, I started to wonder what was going on. We weren't teenagers at a high school party. We were 2 adults who had just come back from a romantic dinner. I was ready to move things forward, but he didn't seem to be getting the hint. After what felt like hours, but was probably more like 30 minutes, I decided to take matters into my own hands. If he wasn't going to make a move, I was. So I stood up, took a deep breath, and took off all of my clothes. Not in a dramatic way, but in a clear, okay, let's do this kind of way. I figured it would be enough to break the tension and let him know I was ready. Instead of reacting the way I expected, he sat up straight, still fully clothed, and looked at me with this serious, almost apologetic expression. I'll never forget what he said next. I can't have sex with you. I have an STD. Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. For a second, I didn't know how to respond. I was standing there completely naked, and he was just sitting there fully dressed, dropping this bombshell like it was nothing. It was, without a doubt, one of the most awkward moments of my life. I don't even remember what I said at first. Probably something like, "Oh, okay," because what else can you say in a situation like that? I sat back down on the couch and quickly started putting my clothes back on, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. My mind was racing. Part of me was mortified, but another part of me was grateful. I mean, he could have not told me. He could have gone through with it and let me find out later, which would have been a million times worse. The fact that he was upfront about it was, in hindsight, a good thing. But in the moment, it was just incredibly, painfully awkward. I tried to be nice about it. I really did. I told him I appreciated his honesty and that I wasn't upset, but it was clear that the night was over. The vibe had gone from romantic and exciting to uncomfortable and strange in a matter of seconds. I grabbed my bag, gave him a polite goodbye, and left his apartment as quickly as I could without making it seem like I was running away. The whole drive home, I replayed the night in my head, trying to figure out where it had all gone wrong. I mean, I couldn't exactly blame him. It wasn't his fault he had an STD, and I respected him for being honest about it. But I also couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. I'd been so excited for that night, and it had ended in the most awkward way imaginable. When I got home, I texted a couple of my friends to tell them what had happened, and their responses were a mix of shock, laughter, and relief. One of them said, "Well, at least he told you. That's more than a lot of guys would do." And she was right. As awkward as it had been, I was grateful that he'd been upfront with me. It could have gone a lot worse. Dating apps are like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Sometimes you match with someone, and the connection is like instant. Other times, you end up with a story so surreal it feels like a bad rom-com plotline. This is one of those stories, and let me tell you, it's a real doozy. I live in the Midwest, where people pride themselves on being friendly, down-to-earth, and honest. So when I matched with a girl on Bumble who seemed like the embodiment of Midwest charm, I was hopeful. Her profile was simple and intriguing. A bright smile, a picture of her hugging a golden retriever, and a bio that read, "Lover of sunsets, road trips, and family dinners." We started chatting, and she was every bit as sweet as her profile suggested. Let's call her Emma, shall we? Emma and I messaged for about a week before setting up a date. Our conversations were easy. She was funny, quick-witted, and had this way of making me feel like she was genuinely interested in what I had to say. We bonded over our shared love of hiking in small-town diners, and before long, I was looking forward to meeting her in person. She suggested a local bar for our first date, a cozy place with live music and great cocktails. I liked that she picked the spot. It showed initiative, and it was a place I'd been meaning to check out anyway. The night of the date, I showed up a little early, nerves buzzing but optimistic. When Emma walked in, I immediately recognized her from her photos. She had the same bright smile, the same warm energy. She was even prettier in person, and I couldn't help but feel like I'd hit the jackpot. We hugged hello, ordered drinks, and settled into a booth near the stage. The first half of the date was great. We talked about everything, our jobs, our families, our favorite books and movies. She told me about her job as a social worker and how rewarding it was to help people, even though it could be emotionally draining. I told her about my weekend hiking trips and my ongoing quest to find the best burger in the city. The conversation flowed easily, and I felt like we were really clicking. But then, halfway through the date, something changed. Emma started glancing at her phone more and more. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was checking the time or responding to a quick text. But her expressions grew more serious, and she seemed distracted. I asked if everything was okay, and she gave me a tight smile and said, "Yeah, just a little family thing. Nothing to worry about." I didn't want to pry, so I let it go, but the mood had shifted. She wasn't as engaged in the conversation anymore, and I could tell her mind was elsewhere. Still, I figured maybe she was just having an off moment. Everyone has those, right? About 20 minutes later, she looked at her phone again and suddenly gasped. "Oh no," she said, her voice tinged with panic. "I just got a text from my mom. She's having a medical emergency, and I need to go check on her." I froze for a second, unsure of what to say. "Oh my God, is she okay? Do you need help?" No, it's fine," she said quickly, grabbing her coat and bag. "I just need to get home. I'm so sorry to cut this short." I stood up, still processing what was happening. "Do you want me to drive you? Or call someone for you?" "No, it's okay. I'll call an Uber. Thank you for understanding." And just like that, she was gone. I sat back down, staring at my half-empty glass of beer, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The date had been going so well, and now it was over, just like that. I felt bad for Emma and her mom, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that something about the whole situation felt off. I finished my drink, paid the tab, and left the bar. As I was walking back to my car, still replaying the night in my head, I spotted Emma. She was just a few blocks away, standing under a street lamp. But she wasn't alone. She was with another guy. They were laughing, her arm hooked around his, and there was no sign of the panic or urgency she'd shown just minutes earlier. My stomach dropped. I stopped in my tracks, staring at them from a distance as reality sank in. There wasn't any family emergency. She'd lied to get out of the date. I felt a mix of emotions, embarrassment, anger, confusion. Mostly, though, I just felt stupid. I'd been duped, plain and simple. I debated confronting her, but decided against it. What good would it do? She clearly wasn't interested, and calling her out would only make things more awkward. Instead, I got in my car and drove home, feeling humiliated and defeated. The next day, I told my friends what had happened. Their reactions ranged from outrage to laughter, with one friend joking, "Well, at least she didn't fake her own death." I tried to laugh it off, but it still stung. I thought about texting Emma to call her out, but I decided it wasn't worth the effort. She'd made her choice, and honestly, I didn't want to waste any more time on someone who clearly wasn't honest. A few days later, though, I got a message from her. "Hey, I had such a great time with you the other night. Would love to see you again soon." I stared at the message, dumbfounded. Was she serious? Did she think I hadn't seen her with that other guy? Or was she just hoping I'd forgotten about the whole family emergency thing? I didn't reply. Instead, I deleted the conversation and unmatched her. Looking back, the whole experience was a lesson in trusting my gut. The moment she started acting distracted, I should have known something was up. People don't just suddenly change their demeanor like that without a reason. Dating apps are a wild ride. Sometimes you meet great people, and sometimes you end up with stories like this one. Awkward, frustrating, and a little bit ridiculous. But hey, at least I got a good story out of it. And now, whenever someone mentions a family emergency, I can't help but smile and think, sure, Jan. Long story here, I apologize. About 8 months ago, Tinder date. She suggests brunch at Max's Wine Dive on McKinney. We're in Dallas. I pick her up at the Arpeggio Apartments in Victory Park. She's not ready, so she buzzes me in. Her apartment is beautiful, lots of high-dollar stuff, no roommate. We go to Max's at 1 p.m. She drinks an entire bottle of champagne by herself. We leave, and in the car she says she wants to stop by a shop in West Village. I park in the parking garage and get out. I look for her and don't see her. I hear a noise, so I look around my car and she's squatting next to the wall peeing on the ground. We go into the shop. She takes a few dresses into the changing room and tells me to come over. I stand outside the changing room and she pulls me inside. She completely undresses, gets in the clothes, asks me what I think, undresses, gets in more clothes, etc. She takes about $1,500 worth of clothes to the counter and tells the cashier she really has to pee. Cashier says sorry. My date begs, so cashier relents and takes her into the back, but it's too late. The damage is done. She also buys a new pair of pants. On the way back to her apartment, she answers a call and starts talking in a foreign language that I can't place. Couldn't even guess the continent. She's very nervous and upset. She hangs up and tells me she has to go to her other apartment at the Cirque, also in Victory Park. She asks me to go in with her. We go into her apartment, which is also completely beautiful and belongs only to her. She has a badass telescope that I start playing with. In the mirror, I see her open a safe and put something in her purse. She tells me we need to leave and asks me to take her to my house. We go to my house and she instantly passes out, Stays passed out for about 6 hours. Wakes up, wants Dairy Queen. It's closed and she starts crying. I take her to Sonic. She gets a cheeseburger, a chili dog, cheese fries, and a sundae. We come home, she eats it and throws up. Passes out on my couch. I read and go to sleep. Next morning she asks if she can stay and watch football. I tell her I have plans and need to take her home. She says she can't go to either of her apartments. I tell her too bad, I have plans, and drop her off at Cirque. She texted asking when we could see each other again, but I never responded. Dating apps can lead you down some strange roads, but nothing prepared me for the absolute nightmare of this Tinder date. It started out like any other match, casual banter, shared hobbies, and some flirty back and forth that made me think this could be something fun. She was a Korean-American woman, absolutely gorgeous, and seemed really laid back. Let's call her Gina. Gina and I had an instant connection over text. We talked about our favorite movies, swapped Spotify playlists, and even joked about how awkward first dates can be. She suggested we meet up at a karaoke bar, and honestly, I loved the idea. It was unique, fun and casual, with none of that staring awkwardly across the table energy that so many first dates have. When the night of the date rolled around, I was feeling good. I arrived at the karaoke bar a few minutes early and grabbed a booth. The place was lively, with groups of friends belting out pop songs and sipping on soju cocktails. It felt like the perfect spot to loosen up and have a good time. When Gina walked in, I was blown away. She looked even better in person, stylish but effortless, with this confident energy that made everyone in the room glance her way. She greeted me with a warm smile, and we immediately hit it off. We ordered drinks, and the conversation flowed like we'd known each other for years. She told me about growing up with strict parents who wanted her to be a doctor, how she rebelled by majoring in art, and her plans to open her own studio someday. I told her about my love of cooking, and how I'd been trying to perfect my kimchi fried rice recipe. She laughed and said she'd be the judge of that someday. Eventually, we decided to start singing. I chose a cheesy 80s ballad, and she picked a K-pop song that she absolutely nailed. We were laughing, clinking glasses, and having the kind of first date that makes you hope there'll be a second. But then things took a turn. After a couple of hours, we were sitting back in the booth, sipping our drinks, when Gina got this faraway look in her eyes. I asked if she was okay, and she hesitated before saying, "There's something I should probably tell you." My stomach did a little flip. That's never a good sign on a first date. "Sure," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "What's up?" She took a deep breath and said, "My ex-boyfriend left me because he thought I was possessed." I laughed, thinking it was a joke, but her face stayed completely serious. "I'm not kidding," she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "He said there's something wrong with me, that I have some kind of spirit attached to me." I blinked, not sure how to respond. What do you mean? Like he thought you were haunted or something?" She nodded. "It started a couple of years ago. Weird things would happen around me, lights flickering, stuff moving. At first, I thought it was just coincidences, but then I started having these episodes." "Episodes?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. She looked down at her drink, swirling it around. "Sometimes I black out, and when I come to, people tell me I was saying things I don't remember. My ex said my voice changes, like it's not me speaking." I let out a nervous laugh, hoping she'd crack a smile and tell me this was all some elaborate joke. But she didn't. She just stared at me with those dark, serious eyes, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Are you messing with me right now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "No," she said firmly. "I wish I was." There was an awkward silence, and I was about to suggest we call it a night when it happened. Gina's eyes rolled back in her head, and she let out this guttural, animalistic sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Her body went rigid, and she started muttering under her breath in a voice that didn't sound like hers. I froze, my brain scrambling to figure out what the hell was going on. Was she having a seizure? A panic attack? Was this some kind of prank? "Gina," I said, my voice shaky. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond. Instead, she started speaking louder, but it wasn't in English or Korean for that matter. It was some guttural, raspy language I didn't recognize. Her hands clenched into fists, and her whole body seemed to tremble. I panicked. I looked around the bar, hoping someone might notice and come over to help, but everyone else was too busy singing and laughing to pay attention. "Gina, you're scaring me," I said, reaching out to touch her arm. The second I touched her, Her head snapped toward me, and her eyes locked onto mine. They didn't look like her eyes anymore. They were cold, almost lifeless. I flinched, pulling my hand back as she let out a low, menacing laugh. And then just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Her body relaxed, and her eyes returned to normal. She blinked a few times, looking confused. "What just happened?" she asked, her voice soft and shaky. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. "You don't remember?" She shook her head, looking genuinely concerned. "No. Did I have one of my episodes?" I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to bolt out of there and never look back, but another part of me felt bad for her. She seemed terrified, like she didn't understand what was happening to her any more than I did. "Yeah," I said finally. "I think you did." She looked down at her hands, her face pale. "I'm so sorry. I told you this would happen." I didn't know what to say. What do you say when your date might be possessed by a spirit? After a few minutes of awkward silence, I suggested we call it a night. She nodded, and I walked her to her car. She apologized again, saying she understood if I didn't want to see her again. I told her to get home safe and watched as she drove away. That was the last time I saw Gina. It started when I matched with a French guy on Bumble. His name was Julien, and he had that effortlessly cool vibe that French people seem to be born with. His profile showed him at art galleries, sipping espresso, and posing with a sketchbook. His bio said he was a painter who had just moved to the city to find inspiration. I was intrigued. We started chatting, and he was charming as hell. He called me ma chère, sent me pictures of his artwork, and even quoted poetry at one point. I swooned, obviously. He seemed cultured, interesting, and genuinely sweet. When he asked me if I'd like to meet for coffee, I didn't hesitate to say yes. We decided on a small cafe downtown, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and handwritten menus. I arrived a little early and picked a table near the window. Julien arrived right on time, looking every bit as handsome as his photos. He had this easy confidence about him, like he belonged in a black and white movie. "Bonjour," he said, kissing me on both cheeks. "You look lovely." I blushed and thanked him, already feeling like this date was off to a great start. He ordered a cappuccino, and we started talking. His accent was thick but melodic, and I found myself leaning forward just to catch every word. He told me about his life in Paris, his love of art, and how he'd moved to the city to escape a breakup and start fresh. It was all very romantic. Then, about 15 minutes into the date, Julien reached down and pulled something out from under the table. At first, I thought it was a bag, but then I saw it, a small cat carrier. "Oh, you brought your cat?" I said, trying to sound casual. "Oui," he said with a smile. "This is Clementine. She goes everywhere with me." I peered into the carrier and saw a fluffy orange tabby staring back at me. She looked unimpressed, as cats tend to do. "She's adorable," I said, though I was a little thrown off. "I mean, who brings a cat on a date?" Julien opened the carrier and lifted Clementine out, placing her gently on the table. She stretched, yawned, and then sat down like she owned the place. Julien started feeding her bits of croissant, murmuring to her in French. "She loves croissant," he said, smiling at me like this was completely normal. I laughed nervously. "She seems very sophisticated." "Ah, yes," he said, stroking her fur. "She is my muse, my little companion. I could not live without her." At this point, I wasn't sure what to think. On one hand, it was kind of sweet how much he loved his cat. On the other hand, it was a little much. But I decided to roll with it. Maybe this was just a quirky French thing. The conversation shifted back to art, and I started to relax again, until Clementine sneezed. Julien immediately pulled out a monogrammed handkerchief and wiped her nose. "Oh, ma pauvre Clementine," he cooed. "Are you feeling unwell?" He looked genuinely distressed, and for a second, I wondered if we were about to leave so he could take her to the vet. But Clementine seemed fine. She stretched again and hopped onto Julien's lap, where she promptly fell asleep. "She is my heart," Julien said, looking down at her with a dreamy expression. "That's really sweet," I said, though I was starting to feel like a third wheel on my own date. Julien spent the next 10 minutes telling me all about Clementine, her favorite foods, her dislikes, her emotional health. He barely asked me anything about myself, and any time I tried to steer the conversation back to something else, he'd find a way to bring it back to the cat. "I think she was a painter in a past life," he said at one point. "She has such an artistic soul." I nodded, not sure how to respond. When the waiter came by to clear our plates, Julien asked if they had a small bowl of cream for Clementine. The waiter looked confused but said he'd check. At this point, I was starting to wonder if this was some kind of elaborate prank. Julian seemed so normal over text, but in person, it was like he and Clementine were in their own little world, and I was just a spectator. When the waiter returned with a small bowl of cream, Julian placed it on the table and watched lovingly as Clementine lapped it up. "She is such a delicate eater," he said, beaming. "Yeah, she's very refined," I said, forcing a smile. By the time the date was over, I was mentally exhausted. Julian walked me to my car, Clementine back in her carrier, and asked if I'd like to see him again. "I'll think about it," I said, which was my polite way of saying no. The next day, Julian texted me a picture of Clementine with the caption, "She misses you already." I didn't respond. Look, I love animals as much as the next person, but there's a line between being a pet lover and being a little too attached. I had matched up with this guy on Hinge, who seemed like a total catch. His name was Rahul. He was Indian American, had a great smile, and his profile was full of things that made him seem like the kind of guy you'd want to bring home to meet your family. He described himself as an entrepreneur, world traveler, and foodie. In one of his pictures, he was skydiving, and in another, he was holding a puppy. Basically, he hit all the right notes for me. Rahul was quick to message me, and he made a great first impression. He was confident but not cocky, funny without trying too hard, and genuinely seemed interested in getting to know me. We talked about our favorite cuisines, our love of travel, and even bonded over how both of our parents had tried to set us up with someone from their friend's family, at least once. For our first date, Rahul suggested dinner at a high-end restaurant downtown. I was impressed. Most of my dating app matches would suggest grabbing coffee or drinks, but Rahul wanted to go all out. I figured he must be serious, and I liked that. The night of the date, I dressed up a little more than usual, feeling excited and maybe even a bit nervous. When I arrived at the restaurant, Rahul was already there, waiting for me at the bar. He stood up as I walked in, greeted me with a warm smile, and complimented my outfit. He was just as handsome as his pictures, and his energy was infectious. We were seated at a cozy table, and from the start, the conversation was easy. He told me about his work, how he'd started his own business, and how it had given him the freedom to travel and live life on his own terms. I was intrigued. Who doesn't love an ambitious guy? As the appetizers arrived, Rahul started asking me about my goals. "What do you want out of life?" he asked, his tone serious but encouraging. It felt like an interview question, but I went along with it, telling him about my career aspirations and my dream of traveling to South America someday. He listened intently, nodding and smiling, and I felt like he genuinely cared about what I had to say. Then, somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, the conversation took a weird turn. "You know," Rahul said, leaning forward, "I think you have a lot of potential." I blinked, confused. Thanks." "No, I mean it," he said, his eyes lighting up. "You seem like someone who's ambitious, who wants more out of life. Am I right?" "I guess so," I said, feeling a little unsure of where this was going. "That's exactly the kind of mindset I look for in people," he said, his tone growing more intense. "Have you ever thought about starting your own business?" I laughed nervously. "Not really. I'm pretty happy with my job." "That's the thing," he said, lowering his voice like he was about to tell me a secret. "Most people think they're happy, but they're stuck in this cycle, working for someone else, trading their time for money, never really building anything of their own. Don't you want more than that?" At this point, alarm bells started ringing in my head. I had a sinking feeling about where this was going, but I decided to play along to see if I was right. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to sound curious. Rahul smiled, like he'd been waiting for me to ask. "I'm part of an amazing business opportunity," he said, pulling out his phone. "It's changed my life, and I think it could change yours too." He opened an app and started showing me a slideshow. Yes, an actual slideshow about a multi-level marketing company he was involved in. He called it a network of entrepreneurs who were unlocking financial freedom by selling health and wellness products. "It's not just about the products," he said, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. "It's about building a team, empowering others, and creating passive income. The best part? You can do it all from your phone." I stared at him, dumbfounded. Was this really happening? Was I actually on a date with someone who was trying to recruit me into an MLM? "That's interesting," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "It is," he said, mistaking my politeness for genuine interest. "I started just a year ago, and now I'm making more money than I ever did at my old job. And the people I've met, they're like family. It's not just a business, it's a lifestyle. He kept going, showing me pictures of luxury cars, exotic vacations, and smiling groups of people who were apparently all part of this amazing opportunity. I tried to steer the conversation back to normal date topics, but Rahul wasn't having it. He was on a roll, and nothing I said could stop him. By the time dessert arrived, I was mentally exhausted. I'd gone from being excited about the date to wanting to crawl under the table and disappear. "So," Rahul said, flashing me a confident smile, "what do you think? Are you ready to take control of your future?" I took a deep breath, trying to figure out the nicest way to say no. "I think it's great that you're passionate about this," I said carefully, "but I don't think it's for me." Rahul's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "That's okay," he said. "I get it, it's a lot to take in, but I really think you'd be amazing at this. How about we set up a call with my mentor? He can explain it better than I can." I wanted to scream. Instead, I forced a smile and said, "I'll think about it." After the date, I went home and immediately blocked Rahul on Hinge. But he wasn't done with me yet. The next day, he sent me a text. "Hey, just wanted to follow up. I really think you'd be a great fit for the team. Let me know if you'd like to chat more about it." I didn't respond. A week later, I got another text. "I hope you're doing well. Just wanted to remind you that the door is always open if you're ready to change your life." At that point, I blocked his number. Looking back, I can't believe I didn't see the red flags sooner. Rahul was charming, sure, but the moment he started talking about unlocking financial freedom, I should have known something was up. I matched with a Mexican-American woman on Tinder named Isabel. She was absolutely stunning, with long dark hair, striking hazel eyes, you name it. Perfect, right? Hold on to that thought, please. We started chatting, and she was hilarious, effortlessly funny in a way that had me grinning at my phone like a fool. She told me she worked as a graphic designer, loved live music, and had a soft spot for dive bars with good margaritas. I was hooked. After a week of chatting, we decided to meet up at one of her favorite spots, a cozy bar with dim lighting, loud music, and a laid-back vibe. The night of the date, I was nervous but excited. When Isabel walked in, she looked even better in person, confident, stylish, and radiating that kind of energy that makes everyone in the room notice. We hugged, ordered drinks, and slid into a booth. From the start, we hit it off. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and she had this way of making me feel like I was the funniest guy in the world. We talked about everything, our favorite bands, bad movies we secretly loved, and the best tacos in the city. She told me a hilarious story about trying to teach her dog to skateboard, and I couldn't stop laughing. For a moment, I thought this might actually be going somewhere. But then, out of nowhere, the night took a turn. We were halfway through our second round of drinks when a guy stormed into the bar, his face twisted in anger. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and looked like he'd just walked off the set of a soap opera. His eyes scanned the room like he was searching for someone, and when they landed on Isabel, his expression darkened. "Isabel," he barked, his voice loud enough to cut through the music. I froze, my drink halfway to my mouth. Isabel stiffened, her smile vanishing. "Oh no," she muttered under her breath. Before I could ask what was going on, the guy stomped over to our booth, glaring at me like I'd just insulted his entire family. "Who the hell is this?" he demanded, jerking his thumb in my direction. "Carlos, what are you doing here?" Isabel said, her voice sharp but controlled. What are you doing here, me?" he shot back. "I saw your post on Instagram. You think you can just move on like that? With this guy?" He jabbed a finger at me, and I suddenly felt like I'd wandered into someone else's drama. "Look, man," I said, trying to stay calm. "I don't know what this is about, but maybe we should all just—" "Shut up," Carlos snapped, cutting me off. "This has nothing to do with you." At this point, people in the bar were starting to notice. The bartender was eyeing us warily, and I could feel the weight of everyone's stares. "Carlos, you need to leave," Isabel said firmly. "We're done, okay? This isn't your business anymore." "Oh, it's my business," he said, leaning closer to the table. His gaze flicked to me, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can just replace me? After everything we went through?" "I'm not doing this with you," Isabel said, standing up. "Go home." Carlos ignored her, his anger now fully focused on me. "You think you're better than me?" he said, his voice rising. "You think you can just walk in and take what's mine?" "Okay, first of all," I said, standing up as well, "I'm not taking anything. You need to calm down. Big mistake." Carlos lunged at me, and before I knew it, we were nose to nose. For a second, I thought he was going to punch me, but the bartender intervened just in time. "Hey," the bartender shouted, stepping between us. "Take it outside or take it home. Either way, you're done here." Carlos glared at me one last time before turning to Isabel. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and threatening. Then he stormed out of the bar, leaving a trail of tension in his wake. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and sat back down, my heart racing. Isabel looked mortified. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think he'd actually show up." "What the hell was that?" I asked, trying to process what had just happened. "That was my ex," she said, rubbing her temples. "We broke up a few months ago, but he's not handling it well." "No kidding," I said, glancing toward the door as if Carlos might come back at any second. "I thought he'd moved on," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't think he'd still be keeping tabs on me." I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt bad for her. Clearly, she hadn't asked for this. But another part of me was wondering what kind of baggage I'd just stumbled into. "Maybe we should call it a night," I said finally. She nodded, looking genuinely upset. "Yeah, that's probably a good idea." I walked her to her car, constantly glancing over my shoulder to make sure Carlos wasn't lurking in the shadows. She apologized again, saying she understood if I didn't want to see her again. I told her to stay safe and drove home, still shaken by the whole ordeal. The next day, Isabel texted me to apologize again. She said she'd filed a restraining order against Carlos and promised that he wouldn't be a problem anymore. I matched with a Scandinavian guy on Bumble named Eric. He had pics of him hiking through snowy mountains, lounging by a bonfire, and holding what looked like a giant fish he'd caught on a fishing trip. His bio was short and to the point. Adventurer. Amateur chef. Looking for someone to make me laugh. We started chatting, and he was sweet and cool and a little cocky. He told me about his job as a software engineer, his love of the outdoors, and how he'd recently moved to the city to experience something new. He also mentioned that he was still adjusting to life in a tiny apartment after growing up with endless space back home in Norway. After a week of messaging, Eric asked if I'd like to come over for dinner. He said he loved cooking for people and wanted to show off his amazing salmon recipe. I was hesitant about going to his place for a first date, but he assured me it would be casual and low pressure. Plus, the idea of being cooked for by a Viking chef was strangely appealing. The night of the date, I showed up at his apartment building, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. He buzzed me in, and when I walked into his unit, I was immediately impressed. The place was small but cozy, with minimalist Scandinavian decor, lots of light wood, neutral tones, and candles. It looked like something out of a home design magazine. "Welcome," Eric said, flashing me a warm smile. He was wearing an apron and holding a wooden spoon, which was somehow both adorable and very attractive. The smell of roasted salmon and fresh dill filled the air, and I could hear soft jazz playing in the background. It felt so comfortable, like he'd put real effort into making the evening special. "Wow, this is amazing," I said, taking off my coat. "Thank you," he said. "Make yourself at home, dinner's almost ready." As I settled onto the couch, I heard a door creak open behind me. I turned around just in time to see a man step out of one of the bedrooms. He was about the same age as Eric, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, and had the kind of bedhead that suggested he'd just woken up from a nap. "Oh hey," he said, rubbing his eyes. "You must be Eric's date." Before I could respond, Eric poked his head out of the kitchen. "Oh yeah, this is Oscar. He's my roommate." Oscar plopped down in the armchair across from me, grinning like we were old friends. "Nice to meet you. So, where are you from?" I glanced at Eric, who looked a little sheepish. Nice to meet you too," I said, trying to hide my confusion. "I'm from here, actually." Oscar nodded, then leaned forward like he was about to interview me. "What do you do for work? How did you and Eric meet? Are you into hiking, or is that just his thing?" Before I could answer, Eric appeared with 2 glasses of wine. "Oscar, don't you have something to do?" he asked, his tone light but pointed. Oscar shrugged. "Not really. I was just going to hang out. Is that okay?" I smiled awkwardly, unsure of what to say. Eric shot me an apologetic look and handed me a glass of wine before disappearing back into the kitchen. For the next 10 minutes, Oscar peppered me with questions about my job, my hobbies, my family, even my favorite Netflix shows. He wasn't mean or rude, but his energy was overwhelming. I felt like I was being interrogated by someone who was trying way too hard to be my best friend. Finally, Eric called us to the table, and I thought, great, maybe Oscar will go do something else now. But no, he pulled up a chair and joined us, as if it were completely normal for a roommate to third wheel a first date. Wow, this looks amazing, I said, trying to focus on the food. Thanks, Eric said, smiling at me. I hope you like salmon. Before I could take a bite, Oscar chimed in. Oh, you're in for a treat. Eric makes the best salmon. He learned the recipe from his grandmother. Right, Eric? Eric nodded, clearly trying to keep his cool. Yeah, that's right. It's a family recipe. Oscar launched into a story about the time Eric had tried to cook the same dish for a group of friends and accidentally set off the fire alarm. Eric laughed nervously, but I could tell he was getting frustrated. As the meal went on, Oscar continued to dominate the conversation. He told me about his job, his recent breakup, and his plans to adopt a dog. He even started giving me fun facts about Eric, like how he's afraid of spiders and once got lost in the woods for 6 hours during a camping trip. At one point, Eric tried to steer the conversation back to me, asking about my favorite travel destinations. But before I could answer, Oscar jumped in with a story about his trip to Iceland. By the time we finished dinner, I was mentally drained. Eric offered to walk me to my car, and I eagerly accepted, grateful for the chance to escape Oscar's relentless chatter. As we walked outside, Eric sighed. I'm so sorry about Oscar. He's a lot. It's okay, I said, smiling weakly. He seems nice. Eric groaned. He's a good guy, but he doesn't know how to give people space. I told him I had a date tonight, but I guess he didn't take the hint. I nodded, unsure of what to say. Eric was great, handsome, sweet, and genuinely interesting, but the thought of dealing with Oscar on a regular basis was daunting. When we reached my car, Eric asked if I'd like to go out again. I hesitated for a moment before saying, maybe. Let me think about it. He smiled, looking a little disappointed but understanding. Of course. Take your time. We said goodbye, and I drove home, replaying the night in my head. As much as I liked Eric, I couldn't shake the feeling that Oscar would always be there, lurking in the background like an overzealous chaperone. The next day, Eric texted me to apologize again for Oscar's behavior. I matched with a Chinese-American guy called Kevin on the one and only Hinge. His bio included things like, I'll never say no to dumplings, and looking for someone to join me on my search for the best boba in town. It was just what I was looking for. We hit it off pretty quickly. Our conversations were lighthearted, full of joking about how we'd both probably spend way too much money on bubble tea if left unchecked. He told me about his job in marketing, his love of cooking, and his favorite hidden gem restaurants in the city. He seemed down to earth, and I liked that. After a week of chatting, we decided to meet up for tea at a cute little shop he recommended. It sounded like the perfect first date, low-key casual, and in public just in case. The tea shop was cozy, with warm lighting and shelves full of exotic-looking teapots. When Kevin walked in, I immediately recognized him from his pictures. He was a little taller than I'd expected, with an easy smile and a nervous energy that felt kind of endearing. We hugged awkwardly, ordered our drinks, and found a small table near the window. At first, the date was great. Kevin was funny and self-deprecating in a way that made me feel comfortable. We talked about our favorite foods, our travel dreams, and the absurdity of dating apps. He told me about his family, how his mom was obsessed with sending him helpful articles about how to find a wife, and I laughed, sharing how my own parents constantly asked if I was seeing anyone special. But then, about halfway through the date, the vibe shifted. We were sipping our drinks when Kevin leaned forward, his expression more serious than it had been all evening. I feel like I need to tell you something, he said, his voice low. I blinked, caught off guard. Okay, what's up? He hesitated for a moment, then said, So my ex-girlfriend and I just broke up a few months ago. That wasn't exactly a bombshell. Most people on dating apps are fresh out of relationships. Okay, I said, nodding. That's pretty normal. No, but she left me for someone else, he said, his voice tightening. It was brutal. She just moved on like I didn't matter. I frowned, unsure of how to respond. I'm sorry to hear that. That must have been really hard. Yeah, Kevin said, staring into his tea. It was. But you know what? I'm over it now. I'm ready to move on. Good for you, I said, genuinely happy for him. Breakups can be rough, but it's great that you're in a better place now. He nodded, then looked up at me with an intensity that made me feel a little uneasy. I actually picked this tea shop for a reason, he said. Oh, I asked, glancing around. Why's that? Kevin hesitated, then said, My ex comes here all the time. My stomach sank. Wait, what? She loves this place, he said, his tone matter-of-fact. I figured there was a chance she might see us here together. I froze, staring at him in disbelief. You planned this so your ex might see us? Kevin shrugged, like it wasn't a big deal. I just thought it would be good for her to see that I'm moving on, you know? Like, let her know that I'm doing fine without her. I didn't even know how to respond. Part of me was stunned that he'd actually admitted to it, and another part of me was furious that I'd unknowingly been dragged into his weird revenge plot. Kevin, I said slowly, are you serious right now? What? He asked, looking genuinely confused. It's not a big deal. I mean, you're amazing, and I thought it'd be nice to show her what she's missing out on. I stared at him, my brain scrambling to process what was happening. You didn't think to maybe mention this before we went on a date? It's not like I planned it to hurt you, he said, his tone defensive. I just wanted her to see that I'm happy, that I've moved on. Kevin, I said, my voice sharp, this is insane. You don't just use someone to make your ex jealous. That's not fair to me. I wasn't trying to use you, he said quickly. I thought it might help me move on, you know? Like closure. Closure? I repeated, my voice rising. How exactly is this closure? What if she shows up? Do you want her to see us together so she can feel bad? What's the endgame here? Kevin opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. Never mind, I said, standing up. I don't want to know. I'm done. Wait, he said, scrambling to his feet. I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean to upset you. Good luck with your closure, I said, grabbing my bag. But I'm not going to be part of it. I left the tea shop without looking back, furious and embarrassed. What started as a fun, low-key date had turned into one of the most ridiculous situations I'd ever found myself in. Kevin texted me later that night, apologizing and saying he'd misjudged things. He asked if I'd be willing to give him another chance, promising that he wouldn't let his ex get in the way this time. I didn't respond. I'll admit it, I ignored a lot of red flags on this one. Like a lot. Looking back, I'm not sure if I was just bored, lonely, or too blinded by lust to connect the dots. But I ended up walking straight into one of the most unhinged situations of my life. And, well, let this be a cautionary tale for anyone who thinks they can just ride it out when the warning signs are practically screaming at them. It all started when I met Amanda on a dating app. Her profile was bold, pictures of her covered in tattoos, including a few that were undeniably edgy. One in particular stood out, the word daddy tattooed, not once, but twice on different parts of her body. I know, red flag number one. But at the time, I thought it was kind of hot in that bad decisions make good stories kind of way. Her bio said she was mostly a lesbian but open to fun, which should have been red flag number two, but again, I ignored it. She messaged me first, and her energy was magnetic, flirty, confident, and refreshingly blunt. She made it clear that she wasn't looking for anything serious, just a good time. I figured why not? We decided to meet up a few nights later at a bar downtown. When Amanda walked in, she was exactly how she described herself, wild, tattooed, and unapologetically sexy. She had this carefree attitude that made her impossible to look away from. We hit it off immediately, laughing over drinks and trading sarcastic jokes. Honestly, it was one of the better first meetups I'd had in a while. By the end of the night, it was clear what was going to happen next. We went back to my place, things heated up quickly, and well, one thing led to another. Afterward, we fell asleep pretty early, probably around midnight or so. When I woke up around 3 in the morning, I noticed she wasn't in bed. I got up to check, thinking maybe she was in the bathroom or something, but nope, she was gone. No text, no note, no goodbye. Red flag number 3. I figured, whatever, maybe that's just her thing. No big deal. And honestly, I didn't give it much thought after that. But about a week later, Amanda called me out of the blue. She wanted to come over again. I hesitated for a second, remembering her vanishing act, but she sounded so casual and fun on the phone that I figured it couldn't hurt. That night, she came over, and things started off just like before. Easy conversation, casual vibes, no pressure. But when things got intimate, she made a request that caught me off guard. Don't look me in the eyes. At first, I thought she was joking. I laughed and said, okay, sure, but she stared at me dead serious and said, no, I mean it. Don't look at me. Red flag number 4. I decided not to make a big deal out of it. Everyone has their quirks, right? So I went along with it. But the vibe was definitely different. It felt a little like she was somewhere else entirely, emotionally shutting me out while still being physically present. Afterward, she stayed for a bit, but there was this strange tension, like she was keeping me at arm's length even though she was the one who came over in the first place. The next time we hooked up, things got even weirder. Right before we started, she flat out told me, "Let's only do it doggy style. I don't want you looking at me at all." Red flag number 5. At this point, I wasn't sure why I was still going along with this. Maybe I was too curious or too caught up in her magnetic, chaotic energy to just walk away. But I agreed, and it became a pattern. She'd call or text, come over, and make the same requests. No eye contact, no positions where I could see her face. It was like she wanted to completely disconnect from the experience. After a few weeks of this, I started to feel uneasy about the whole situation. I wasn't sure what her deal was, but it was clear that there was something she wasn't telling me. I decided to put a little distance between us, figuring she'd take the hint. That's when my roommate Jake dropped a bomb on me. "Wait, you're hooking up with Amanda?" he asked one night when I casually mentioned her name. "Yeah, why?" I said, instantly suspicious of his tone. Jake gave me a look. "Dude, I know her. She's from my hometown. She's unhinged." Red flag number 6. "What do you mean?" I asked, suddenly feeling like I was in way over my head. "She has a reputation," Jake said, lowering his voice. "She's known for losing it on people. Like full-on destroying people's property if she doesn't get her way. One guy she dated had his car keyed and all his clothes burned after they broke up." Red flag number 7. I sat there, processing what he'd just told me. On one hand, it made sense. She definitely had a chaotic vibe about her. On the other hand, I wasn't sure what to do with this information. Should I cut things off completely? Would that just make things worse? I decided to play it cool and slowly start distancing myself from Amanda. But Amanda wasn't having it. When I stopped responding to her texts right away, she started texting more. And when I didn't give her the attention she wanted, she sent walls of texts, paragraph after paragraph, about how I was disrespecting her as a woman and how she wasn't just a piece of meat. Red flag numbers 8 and 9. She left me voice messages, too long, rambling ones where her tone would swing wildly from angry to tearful. In one, she called me a coward for not being honest with her. In another, she accused me of leading her on and playing with her emotions. It was confusing and exhausting, especially considering she'd made it clear from the start that she wasn't looking for anything serious. The final straw came when she showed up at my apartment unannounced. I was home alone, and when I heard the knock on the door, I had a sinking feeling it was her. Sure enough, there she was, standing in the hallway with this intense look in her eyes. "Hey," she said, her voice sharp. "Why have you been ignoring me?" "I haven't been ignoring you," I said, trying to keep my cool. "I've just been busy." "Bullshit," she snapped. "You've been avoiding me, and I deserve to know why." At that point, I realized there was no way to diffuse the situation without making it worse. I told her I needed space, and that things weren't working out. She just stared at me for a moment, her expression unreadable, before turning on her heel and storming off. I didn't hear from her for a few days, which made me think that maybe, just maybe, she'd moved on. But then the text started again. More walls of text, more accusations, more emotional whiplash. I ended up blocking her number and deleting her from every app one could think of. I've had some strange and uncomfortable experiences with dating apps, but this one takes the cake. It started out fairly normal, just two people chatting, enjoying some good vibes, and planning to meet up. But by the end of it, I found myself checking over my shoulder every time I left my house. Looking back, I wish I had seen the warning signs sooner. I matched with a woman named Sophie on Bumble. Sophie came across as someone who wasn't just looking for a hookup, which I appreciated, had too many of these types in the past which I did not want again. I wasn't necessarily trying to find my soulmate, but I also wasn't interested in something purely casual at the time. We started chatting, and Sophie was great to talk to, and after a couple of days of texting, she suggested meeting up for coffee at Starbucks. I was in. We met at a cute little cafe not too far from where I lived. Sophie looked just like her pictures, and she had this bubbly energy that immediately put me at ease. We talked about our favorite books, our dream travel destinations, and our mutual disdain for pineapple on pizza. She was charming and easy to talk to, and I left the date thinking it had gone really well. Over the next week, we kept texting, and Sophie seemed even more interested in me than I'd expected. She'd send me long, excited messages about her day, ask about mine, and suggest new places we could go together. At first, I was flattered. It's nice to feel wanted, and Sophie really seemed to be into me. But then it started to feel a little overwhelming. She'd text me constantly, morning, afternoon, night. If I didn't respond within an hour, she'd send follow-up messages. Hey, are you okay? Or did I say something wrong? I tried to brush it off as enthusiasm, but it was starting to feel like she was expecting way more of my time and attention than I could reasonably give. The second date came around, and we met up for a walk in the park. It was pleasant enough, but Sophie kept dropping little comments that felt oddly intense for someone I'd only just started seeing. She'd say things like, I feel like I can really be myself around you, or I think we have something really special. I smiled and nodded along, but in the back of my head, I was thinking, we've only been on 2 dates. How can you feel that way already? After that, things escalated quickly. She started showing up at places where I happened to be, my favorite coffee shop, the gym, even the grocery store. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. But then it happened again, and again. One day, I was at the gym when I noticed Sophie on the treadmill a few rows away. She wasn't wearing workout clothes. She was just walking casually, staring at her phone. I waved, trying to keep things light, and she came over immediately. Hey, fancy seeing you here, she said, grinning. Yeah, hey, I said, glancing at the weights in my hands. You work out here too? Not really, she said, shrugging. I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop by. It felt weird, but I didn't want to make a scene, so I just nodded and went back to my workout. But after that, it seemed like Sophie was always in the neighborhood. The breaking point came when I was at a friend's party. It was a small gathering, just a handful of people hanging out and playing board games. I hadn't told Sophie about it, so I was completely shocked when she walked through the door halfway through the night. Hey, she said, smiling like it was the most normal thing in the world. My friends exchanged confused glances as I pulled Sophie aside. What are you doing here? I asked, trying to keep my voice low. Oh, I saw your Instagram story, she said casually. I figured I'd come by and say hi. I hadn't even thought to check who'd viewed my story, but apparently, Sophie had been keeping close tabs on me. This is a private party, I said, trying to keep my cool. You can't just show up uninvited. She looked hurt. I thought you'd be happy to see me. I didn't invite you, I said firmly. You need to leave. She stared at me for a moment, then turned and walked out without another word. I spent the rest of the night trying to explain to my friends what had just happened. After that, I stopped responding to Sophie's messages. I thought she'd get the hint and move on, but instead she doubled down. She started leaving voicemails, some of them angry, others tearful. She'd say things like, I don't understand why you're ignoring me. I thought we had something real, and you're not even giving me a chance to explain myself. One night, I came home to find a handwritten note taped to my door. It said, I'm sorry if I scared you. I just want to talk. Please call me. That was the last straw. I blocked her number, deleted her from every social media platform, and made sure my Instagram stories were set to private. For weeks, I felt like I was looking over my shoulder every time I left the house. I never saw Sophie again, but the whole experience left me shaken. When I first matched with Kale, I was sitting in the break room at work, half listening to my coworker complain about her boyfriend for the 4th time that week. I'd been swiping out of boredom more than anything, tapping through profiles like they were part of some puzzle I didn't want to finish. I wasn't expecting much. Most of the time, dating apps feel like trying to fall in love in a waiting room. You sit, you scroll, you hope something clicks. But then there he was, Kale. Big smile, a little scruff on his jaw, and these photos that didn't feel curated, which somehow made them feel even more curated. One was of him and his daughter baking cookies, both in matching aprons. Another at a carnival, her on his shoulders, her face painted like a tiger, him grinning like he didn't mind the wait. And one that stuck with me the most, her asleep on his chest, a blanket thrown over both of them, like they'd just collapsed in place. He looked like a man who actually liked being a dad, not the kind who used his kid as bait, but like someone who knew how to show up. His bio was short, just, full-time dad to the best kid in the world. Looking for someone kind, grounded, and cool with late-night Disney movies. It felt wholesome, so I messaged him. He replied within an hour. From the start, Kale had this quiet charisma, not flashy, not trying too hard, just present. He asked real questions, not just what do you do, or what are you looking for, but stuff like what's something your family teases you about, and when's the last time you felt really safe. I found myself telling him stories about my dog, about my mom's terrible singing voice, about how I used to sneak into the campus library late at night just to be alone. He didn't flirt aggressively. He didn't rush anything. He just listened, and not in the passive, I'm waiting for my turn to talk way, but really listened. He told me early on that he took parenting seriously, that his daughter, whom he referred to only as my little one, was the center of his life. He said he wasn't looking to introduce her to anyone unless it felt real. I respected that. It made him feel solid, like someone who'd done the work on himself. We went on our first date about 2 weeks later. Coffee, of course, neutral ground. This indie place that played 90s R&B and sold scones the size of your head. He was even better in person. Not just good looking, though he was, but grounded. He asked follow-up questions, remembered things I'd said in passing, told me he liked how I paused before answering questions, like I cared about saying what I meant. By our third date, he took me to this quiet trail by a lake because I'd once mentioned I liked being near water. We sat on a bench for an hour watching ducks fight over crusty bits of bread some kid had thrown. We didn't even kiss, and I loved that. I'd been on dates where everything felt like a performance, where both people were trying to outcharm each other. This wasn't that. It just felt natural. He still didn't talk about his daughter much. Just little things. She loved horses, hated socks, was obsessed with peanut butter. I figured he was being protective, which made sense. I didn't push. I liked the pace. I liked the way he'd text me in the mornings with a song recommendation or a dad joke he'd heard at work. After about 6 weeks, I started coming over more often. His place was clean but lived in. Toys in the corner. Finger paintings on the fridge. A little pair of sparkly sneakers lined up by the door like she'd just stepped out of them and would be back any minute. I never met her. He said she stayed with his sister on weekends, so he could have a break. Again, I didn't push. I figured he knew what was best. After 3 months, it felt like we were really building something. I started leaving toothbrushes. He gave me a drawer. We talked about going on a road trip together in the spring. Even floated the idea of me meeting the little one in a few months. I felt like, for the first time in years, I was in something that had legs. Something real. And then, one night, I ran into someone I hadn't seen since college. Rowan. She worked at the same community center I used to volunteer at. We caught up, laughed about the time we accidentally locked ourselves in the supply closet. Eventually, I mentioned I was seeing someone. I said his name, Cale, and Rowan's face changed. Not subtly, like something physically hit her. Wait, Cale? As in Cale, who has a daughter named Mila. I nodded slowly. Yet why? She hesitated, looked me dead in the eye and said, "You need to know something." She told me Cale's real name was Selim Denton. That about 1.5 years ago, he and Mila's mother, Selena, had gone through a messy custody battle. Restraining orders. Accusations flying both ways. But the worst part, the part that made my stomach drop, was what she said next. Last summer, Selena dropped Mila off for her court-approved visitation. He never brought her back. I stared at her, not understanding. He disappeared, she said. Changed his number. Moved cities. Changed jobs. And somehow, because of a jurisdiction loophole, it wasn't technically kidnapping. But Selena's been looking for them ever since. I left that conversation in a daze. My body felt like it was moving through sludge. I thought about the pictures, the stories, the fact that he never introduced me to Mila, that he never had pictures of her with other kids, at school, with her mom. Just perfectly framed snapshots of their little world. A world with no context, no history, just curated moments. I waited a few days, tried to figure out how to even begin that conversation. Then, I just did it. I sat across from him on the same couch where we'd watched Finding Nemo 3 times in one weekend, and I told him what Rowan said. He didn't deny it, not even for a second. He just sat there, silent, then nodded, like I'd finally caught up. She wasn't safe, he said. Selena, she has issues. She's unstable. The court didn't see the full picture. Mila was scared of her. He said it calmly, like he was explaining why he didn't pay his parking tickets. I did what I had to do, he said. You'll understand once you really love her too. That sentence felt like a knife. I left. Fast. Didn't pack a bag. Left behind a hoodie, a charger. Blocked him on everything. I spent the next week sitting on my couch, barely eating, trying to replay every memory. Every word. Looking for the cracks. The lies. There were signs. The way he never let me meet her. The fact that her name was never mentioned in school events. No playdates. No birthday party invites. Just the two of them, always. Like they were hiding. A few weeks later, I got a message from an unknown number. It was Selena. All she said was, "Thank you." I suspected he was dating again. I just needed confirmation. "You don't have to reply. I just hope you're okay." I didn't reply. After that, I deleted the apps. Not in a dramatic, "I'm done with dating" kind of way. I just couldn't bring myself to look at another profile that said just a dad or family first. Because now I knew some people use their kids as armor, as bait, as proof that they can love. But they don't love right. They love in a way that swallows, controls, justifies anything. It's been a year. I still think about Mila. I wonder if she's okay. If she remembers her mom. If she asks about her. If she ever wonders why her world got smaller when she was too young to... I met Sable at a sound bath. Yeah, I know. I wasn't even supposed to be there. A friend dragged me after my breakup, claiming that vibrational recalibration would help me release residual sadness. I thought we were going to a spa. Instead, I ended up lying on a yoga mat in a dark room while a woman in linen pants hit a giant bowl with a mallet. Sable was sitting a few mats over. She was the only person not wearing all white. She had on a long gray cardigan and black leggings, and her hair was tucked into a messy braid that looked like it had taken effort to look effortless. She had a notebook open in her lap and was writing before the session started. I remember wondering what she could possibly be taking notes on. Vibes, medium-low? After the session, we made eye contact by the herbal tea station. She smiled at me like she knew something I didn't. Then she said, "You looked like you were holding your breath the entire time." I said, "I was afraid of accidentally snoring." She laughed short and loud and said, "You're not the only one." We talked for 15 minutes. She told me she was a wellness coach and emotional embodiment facilitator. I didn't know what that meant, and I still don't. But she said it in a way that made it sound vaguely impressive. I told her I worked in urban planning. She said, "So you design systems for how people move through cities." I guide people through how they move through pain. I should have seen it then. But I didn't. Because she was funny. And warm. And asked questions that made me feel like I was interesting, even when I wasn't saying anything that deep. We exchanged numbers. She texted me later that night. "Your energy feels heavy but curious. I'd love to see where that goes." I didn't know what that meant. But I wanted to find out. Our first date was at a vegan cafe that smelled like patchouli and regret. She ordered a turmeric latte and asked if I'd ever felt safe in my own body. I said, "I think so," and she nodded like I'd passed a test. She told me she used to work in marketing, but had a spiritual awakening after a traumatic breakup and had since devoted herself to healing work. She had a blog called Root and Rise and a podcast where she interviewed high-frequency men about emotional availability. I listened to one episode. The intro music was a rain stick. I still liked her. She was thoughtful. She texted me affirmations. She brought me herbal tinctures when I had a cold. She asked me if I wanted to hold hands during meditation. She made me feel like I was part of something meaningful, like our relationship was some kind of sacred contract. She always said things like, "This isn't just dating. This is alchemy." I didn't know what that meant either, but it sounded nice. We dated for a few months. She started posting about me on her Instagram, but not in a "here's my boyfriend" way. More like, navigating love with a man who is still learning to hold space for his own fragility. I wasn't tagged, but I recognized the quotes. She'd write captions like, "Last night my partner admitted to feeling emotionally numb. I held him not to fix him, but to remind him that softness isn't weakness." That was about me. I knew because I'd said it. On her couch. After a long day. When I let my guard down. And now it was content. I asked her about it once. Gently. "Do you think it's okay to post things from our conversations?" She said, "I never use names. And it's not about you, it's about the lesson. The transmission." I nodded. Because I didn't want to be the guy who shuts down a woman's expression. Because she made me feel like I was part of something healing. But then her blog changed. She started a series called The Wounded Masculine Diaries. Each post was a letter. To the man who couldn't love me. To the man who ghosted me emotionally. To the man who weaponized silence. Again, no names. But the timeline fit. The details were familiar. One post began, "To the man who cried in my arms and then pulled away, afraid of what it meant to be truly seen." I'd cried once. After a call with my dad. I didn't think it was a big deal. Apparently it was a whole entry. She wrote, "I held him like a mother holds a child, without needing anything in return. But when I asked for emotional reciprocity, he vanished into his trauma." I hadn't vanished. I'd just asked for space. I confronted her. I said, "I don't think I'm comfortable being part of your brand." She smiled. Not kindly. The kind of smile people have when they think you're being small-minded. She said, "You're not part of my brand. You're part of my healing." I said, "That's not a compliment." She said, "You brought up wounds in me that needed to be addressed. That's sacred." I asked, "Did you ever like me? Or was I just a case study?" She said, "What's the difference?" That's when I knew it was over. I left. She posted a quote on her story that night. "Sometimes the medicine leaves before the lesson is fully learned." I blocked her. 2 weeks later, someone sent me a TikTok she posted. A video of her standing in a field, looking wistful, with the caption, "When he couldn't hold my truth, I held it myself." The audio was a slowed-down Lana Del Rey song. The hashtags included #HealingJourney and #ToxicMasculinity. I was never named, but I was everywhere in it. Now, when I see influencers talking about emotional labor and holding space, I twitch a little. Because I believe in growth. I believe in vulnerability. I believe men should do better. But I also know what it feels like to be turned into a metaphor. To have your pain repackaged as content. To be someone's healing arc. When someone says, "I'm not sharing your story, I'm sharing mine," I want to ask, how do you tell a story without dragging someone else's body through it? Sable built a platform on being wounded by men. But what she never admitted was that she was doing her own kind of harm. She didn't break my heart. She branded it. And now it's archived in a carousel post with 73,000 likes. I met Calix during a time in my life best described as algorithmically vulnerable. You know the era. I'd just turned 30. My friends were all posting engagement photos with captions like "Forever just got real loudly crying face red heart." My therapist had suggested I stop dating people who don't seem to like you back. So naturally, I downloaded 3 dating apps at once. I told myself it was research. For what? I wasn't sure. Maybe for a future memoir titled "Mistakes I Made While Lonely." But really, I was just bored and had a vague craving for validation and someone else's couch. Calix's profile stood out because it didn't try hard. His bio simply said, "Low-key, podcast listener. I'd rather hear about your childhood than your job." No punchlines. No fluent in sarcasm. Just quiet intrigue. His photos were equally chill. One blurry concert pic. One of him holding a cat that was clearly not his. A mirror selfie in a very clean bathroom. One photo of a tree with the caption, "I think about this tree a lot." I messaged him first. "What about the tree?" He replied, "It grew sideways and still didn't quit." I relate. Reader, I rolled my eyes, but I also smiled. I told myself I'd give him one date. We met at a coffee shop that had aggressively neutral lighting and overpriced cold brews. He was early and reading something on his phone. When I arrived, he stood up, smiled like he already knew me, and said, "You're exactly how I pictured." I should have been creeped out by that. Instead, I felt flattered, which probably says more about my self-esteem at the time than about him. He was easy to talk to, not in a charismatic, life-of-the-party kind of way, more like the human equivalent of a weighted blanket. He listened, really listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't one-up. When I made a joke, he laughed quietly like it was a secret just for us. We talked about memory and music and how weird it is that we all just blindly trust phone chargers in public places. He asked smart questions. What's a lie you tell so often it feels true? What would you do if no one remembered anything you said the next day? I told him things I hadn't said out loud in years. I'm not even sure why. He didn't push. He just made space. And when we said goodbye, he didn't ask to walk me to my car. He just said, "I hope you sleep well." Which, for some reason, felt more intimate than any goodnight kiss. We kept seeing each other. He wasn't clingy. He didn't text constantly. But when he did, the messages were thoughtful. Specific. Heard this song and thought of the way you tilted your head when you talked about your sister. Do you think love is more about recognition or invention? I fell for him in increments. Little gestures. Shared silences. The way he always paused before answering, like he was searching for a real response instead of playing conversational tennis. We had this running joke that I was subject 6. It started one night when I joked about feeling like he was studying me. He grinned and said, "You are." But in a good way. I laughed. Because of course I did. Of course I didn't realize he was being literal. It started unraveling on a Tuesday. We were at his place, minimalist, warm-toned, suspiciously tidy. I was scrolling through his bookshelf while he made tea. That's when I noticed the journal. It wasn't hidden, just sitting on the desk. A plain black moleskine, partially open. I wouldn't have read it if it hadn't been open to a page titled Subject 6, Conversational Drift Log. At first, I thought it was a joke, like a writing exercise or something academic. But then I saw bullet points. Emotional response observed at 9:12 p.m., softened voice, shoulder tilt. Topic introduction, family dynamics and chronic illness. Subject's vulnerability rating, 7.3/10. Follow-up question, what was your role growing up? Result, trust increase confirmed. I sat down. My hands were cold. I flipped through the pages. There were dates, quotes, transcripts, ratings. He'd been logging me. Every conversation, every reaction, every moment I thought was spontaneous. He had data on me. He had literal tags like, subject shows high receptivity to softness when framed in existential language. Subject responds well to delayed compliments. Subject tends to mirror emotional tone, useful for modeling. I put the notebook down. Quietly, politely, like it might explode. When he came back with the tea, I didn't yell. I just asked, what is this? He didn't even pretend not to know. He sat down across from me, exhaled and said, okay. You weren't supposed to see that yet. Yet. Not, you weren't supposed to see that. Not, I can explain. Just, yet. He explained everything like it was no big deal. Like we were talking about a school project or a new app he was beta testing. He said he was running a long-form social experiment. Not for school. Not for money. For Reddit. Yes. Reddit. Apparently there's a whole sub for empathic data architecture, whatever that means, where people document how others respond to emotional scaffolding. Calix had been posting updates under a burner account. His posts had titles like, Subject 6, emotionally intelligent, distrustful at first, responds to music-based anchors. Testing the vulnerability ratio. When do they open up versus when do they pull away? People were following it, commenting, giving him advice. Some of them had been reading about me, about us, for weeks. I asked him if he'd ever actually liked me. He said, and I quote, I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. I left, obviously, blocked him on everything, reported his Reddit account, deleted our texts, threw away the hoodie he left at my place that still smelled like bergamot and betrayal. But the weirdest thing? I still think about him. Not because I miss him, but because I still don't know what was real. Like, was it all fake? Or was I just emotionally optimized? I have no idea where the line is. I started rereading our texts one night. I know, terrible idea, and realized how much of our connection was engineered. He knew when to drop a compliment, when to introduce a difficult topic, when to go silent so I'd fill the gap. He was playing me like a piano, and I was singing. The thing is, I don't actually mind being vulnerable. I like intimacy. I like talking about hard things. I like being known. But with him, I wasn't being known. I was being logged, tracked, rated, filed under Subject 6. Now, when someone mirrors my body language or pauses just long enough before answering, I flinch. I wonder if they're listening or just collecting. I don't use dating apps anymore. Not because I think everyone's running experiments, but because I don't trust myself to tell the difference. It's not just betrayal. It's a breach of reality. Calix didn't break my heart. He rewrote it. He turned it into a case study. And now, even my memories feel like data. I met Bram at a mutual friend's Halloween party. I was dressed as a tired grad student, which is to say, I wore jeans and a hoodie and told people I was in costume. He was dressed as a doctor, which I later found out was less a costume and more a lightly exaggerated version of what he wore as a tech consultant. We started talking over a bowl of off-brand candy corn. I was new to the city, having moved from Singapore to pursue a 2-year graduate program. He asked what I was studying, then asked how long I'd been here, how I liked it, and casually, how long I planned to stay. At the time, I thought it was just small talk. I told him I was on a student visa, and he nodded like that meant something to him. We exchanged numbers. I didn't think much of it, but he followed up the next day with a voice note. Had fun talking to you last night. Let's get coffee sometime. You picked the place. I picked a cozy cafe near campus. He showed up 10 minutes early and had already bought me a latte by the time I arrived. He asked if I liked cinnamon, and I said yes, and he grinned like he'd guessed right. We talked for 2 hours. He asked about my favorite books, which part of Singapore I was from, whether I missed the weather or the food more. He asked if I ever got homesick. I told him yes, mostly around holidays. He said, well, maybe I can give you something to look forward to here. And I smiled, because it felt like a nice thing to say. We started dating. Slowly, then all at once. He was thoughtful. He remembered my favorite pastry. He sent me playlists. He came to my thesis presentation and brought flowers. He wasn't loud or flashy, just steady, consistent, the kind of person who made you feel like you could exhale around them. He never made a big deal about me being international, but he asked questions. About my visa, about how long I could stay after graduation, about whether I'd ever consider staying here long term. I told him I wasn't sure, that it depended on work, on sponsorship, on timing. He nodded, said, that makes sense, and kissed my forehead. I didn't feel like a project. I felt like a person. We dated for 6 months. Then one night, while I was at his apartment, I borrowed his laptop to look up a recipe. He was in the shower. I didn't snoop. I opened a new tab, typed chicken coconut curry, and his bookmarks popped up. One of them was labeled, Visa Readiness List. My stomach tightened. I clicked. It was a spreadsheet. Google Sheets. Tidy columns. Color-coded. At the top, a title. Potential Partners by Visa Status Plus Emotional Viability. Under that, a note. For tracking only. Not final. Do not share. There were rows. Names. Notes. Flags. Some of the columns. Visa type. Country of origin. Field of study/profession. Emotional dependence score, 1 to 10. Level of interest, mutual, one-sided, unclear. Potential for sponsorship marriage, Y/N. Would say yes if asked tomorrow? Y/N. My name was on the 4th row. Next to my name. Visa type, F1. Country, Singapore. Field, international relations. Emotional dependence, 7. Interest, mutual. Marriage potential, Y. Say yes if asked. Probably. I froze. It took me a full minute to realize I wasn't breathing. When he came out of the shower, I shut the tab and pretended nothing had happened. I told him I had to get up early and left. I didn't say anything for 2 days. Then I asked him flat out, do you keep lists of the women you date? He didn't lie. He just sighed. I do, he said, like it was a spreadsheet about workout routines. It helps me stay organized. I've had complicated relationships before. This helps me think clearly. I asked what visa readiness meant. He said, it's not what you think. I said, then explain. He said, it's just, some people are more likely to stay. More likely to want something serious. I'm not using anyone. I'm just being strategic. Strategic. Like love is a board game. I asked him, did you start dating me because I'm on a visa? He paused. Then said, that was part of it. It wasn't the whole thing. I left. He texted me the next day. Can we talk like adults? I didn't respond. He sent another message. I'm sorry you saw it that way. That wasn't the intention. But it was. Because here's the thing. You don't make a spreadsheet unless you intend to use it. You don't assign someone an emotional dependence score unless you're trying to calculate something. I told my friend about it. She said, he's just a creep. Block him. But it didn't feel that simple. It felt humiliating. Because I'd liked him. I'd trusted him. I'd let him meet my parents over Zoom. I'd told him what it felt like to be in a country where nothing is guaranteed. Where your right to stay depends on paperwork and timelines and luck. And he'd turned that into a metric. I wasn't his girlfriend. I was a data point in a risk assessment model. I deleted his number. Blocked him on everything. Still, sometimes, when I'm swiping on dating apps, I wonder if the next guy is also keeping lists. If he's also thinking, she's nice, she's warm, and she has a ticking clock on her residency. I wonder if I'm being chosen because I'm wanted, or because I'm temporary. There's a specific kind of vulnerability that comes with being in a country that doesn't belong to you. Most people think it's about money, or jobs, or language, but it's also about love. Because when your future depends on paperwork, every relationship feels like a negotiation. And sometimes, you realize you weren't building a life together. You were being sorted, filed, weighed, and you didn't even know it. I met Leaf on a dating app one didn't even mean to download. I was in my apartment, half unpacked, half lonely, sitting on the floor with a cold beer and the kind of silence that starts to echo if you let it. I'd just moved to a new city. New job. New everything. No friends yet, no rhythm. Just boxes and a vague sense that I'd made a mistake. So I did what a lot of people do when they don't want to feel like a failure. I downloaded a dating app. Told myself it wasn't serious. Just to meet people. Just for conversation. Just for now. Leaf was one of the first people I matched with. His profile was quiet. That's the best word I can use. Quiet. No shirtless selfies. No jokes about tacos. No irony. Just him in a soft gray sweater, wireframe glasses, a few mirror selfies with books stacked in the background. His bio said he worked in machine learning, which I read as probably something I'd never fully understand, but smart enough to not worry about. He didn't come on strong. No "hey gorgeous." No awkward pickup lines. He just asked simple, thoughtful questions. Like what I thought about emotional memory. Whether I believed people could actually change. It was kind of deep, but not in that Instagram therapy kind of way. More like he'd been thinking about it for a long time and was offering it up without expecting a clever answer. We talked for a week. Easy, steady back and forth. No games. No 3-day waiting periods. Just a calm rhythm that made me feel like I could exhale around him. Our first date was at a used bookstore cafe hybrid that smelled like old pages and espresso. Only 7 tables. Aggressively fast Wi-Fi. He ordered a hot chocolate and brought a notebook with him. Not a laptop. A notebook. The kind with a leather cover and a pen loop. When I asked him about it, he said, "It helps me think better when I write while I listen." Which sounded weird, but charming. Like he was either a genius or someone who carried a Moleskine because he liked the aesthetic. Either way, I found it oddly endearing. We sat across from each other, sipping warm drinks and talking about nothing and everything. He asked about my childhood. What made me feel safe? What memory I'd delete if I could? He didn't interrupt. He paused when I spoke. Really paused. Like he was absorbing it. I started to feel like I was being studied. Not in a creepy way. In a you matter kind of way. And after years of dating people who only looked up from their phones when the server brought food, that kind of attention felt like water in the desert. We kept seeing each other. Nothing flashy. Walks. Ramen nights. Long, late-night calls where we talked until one of us fell asleep. He remembered everything. Once, I mentioned I liked a particular snack I hadn't had since childhood. A week later, he showed up with it in a bag from a specialty store across town. It felt like intimacy. Like someone was gently building a map of me and actually planned to use it. But over time, something started to feel off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Just a weird sense that our conversations had a pattern. Like he was following a script only he could see. He'd ask questions that nudged me towards certain stories. He'd follow up on old threads in a way that felt rehearsed. Then there were the texts. He'd sometimes send me screenshots of our conversations. Not framed as cute or funny. Just excerpts. Like, interesting phrasing here, or this shows early stage vulnerability. I laughed the first time. Asked, "Are you analyzing me?" He smiled and said, "Just fascinated by how people build trust." I should have been more alarmed. But I wasn't. Because I liked him. Because I wanted it to work. Because when someone makes you feel seen, it's easy to ignore how they're doing it. Even when the seeing starts to feel more like surveillance. He never shared much about himself unless I asked directly. And even then, his answers were always neat. Polished. Like he'd practiced them. Like he knew which parts to reveal and which to hold back. But I kept going. Because I thought I was falling for him. Then, one afternoon, I went to his place while he was out grabbing groceries. He'd left his laptop open. I wasn't snooping. I swear I wasn't. I just wanted to put on some music. The screen had gone dark, and I nudged the mouse. Instead of music, I saw a spreadsheet. I don't know why I clicked on it. Instinct, maybe. Or maybe that quiet voice in my head that had been whispering for weeks finally got loud enough to move my hand. The file was called Project Clearevo_7. Inside were tabs labeled with names. Full names. One of them was mine. I clicked. There were columns. Dozens. Conversation topics. Emotional triggers. Tone analysis. Response patterns. Links to text threads, audio snippets. Dates. Times. Emotional states. Tags like increased trust, emotional openness, push-pull response time. It was like someone had quantified my personality. He had logged how long it took me to respond to vulnerable texts. Whether I leaned forward or back during certain questions. If my voice cracked. If I hesitated. And it wasn't just me. There were others. Dozens of names. Each with their own data set. I went still. I stared at the screen, not breathing. Then I found another file. A document titled Romantic Intelligence AI Dataset. And that's when it all clicked. Leaf wasn't dating me. He was studying me. He was training something. Building something. I wasn't a girlfriend. I was a test case. I left before he came back. I didn't leave a note. Didn't take my toothbrush. A week later, he emailed me. Not to apologize. Not to explain. Just to ask if I'd sign a release form allowing him to use my non-identifiable conversational patterns in his final model. He offered $500. I didn't respond. He emailed again. Offered more. Then, a month later, a tech blog published an article about a new startup launching something called Sentient Spark, a chatbot designed to replicate human bonding using real emotional relationships as training data. Leaf was listed as a co-founder. There was a demo video, a soft-voiced AI asking questions in a rhythm I recognized, using phrasing I had used. Repeating things I had once whispered into Leaf's ear, thinking I was safe. Now, strangers were hearing my words come out of a synthetic voice. I stopped watching halfway through. Now, when someone says, "You're so emotionally intelligent," I flinch. When someone listens too carefully, I wonder if they're taking notes. When someone remembers too much, I wonder if it's because they care, or because they're coding me. Dating isn't the same anymore. Not just because of Leaf. But because I don't know how to stop scanning for signs, for patterns, for anyone who seems too attentive, too consistent, too perfect at listening, because people who say they love emotions, sometimes they're just building something. I met Eris 3 months after I got out of a long, exhausting relationship, the kind where you forget what your own voice sounds like until it's over. I wasn't looking for anything serious, and I told myself that over and over like some kind of mantra. I just wanted to date again, to remember what it felt like to be interesting to someone. We met on an app, of course. Nothing new there. Her profile was simple, a little artsy but not overdone. Her bio said, grad student, studying people, coffee loyalist. Ask me something strange. She had this one photo, just her in a yellow coat, standing in the middle of a crosswalk, turning back toward the camera like she'd just heard her name. Her expression wasn't flirty. It was focused, like she was looking directly into whoever was behind the lens. It felt like she was looking at me. I messaged her first. She replied within minutes. From the start, Eris was curious. Not nosy, curious. She asked smart questions. Never too personal, but always layered. If your happiness was a weather system, what would the forecast look like? What's a truth you've never said out loud, even though no one told you to keep it secret? I told her things I didn't expect to. Not because I was trying to impress her, but because she made it easy. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush. She let every sentence float in the air for a beat before responding. We met in person 2 weeks after matching. A bookstore cafe near campus. She wore a navy cardigan with mismatched buttons and black boots that looked like they'd walked through 10 cities. She smelled like cinnamon and paper. I remember that. She smiled when she saw me, like she already knew who I was. Not in a creepy way. Just warm. Familiar. We talked for hours. She asked me about my family, but not in the generic siblings or not kind of way. She asked what role I played growing up, the fixer, the peacekeeper, the ghost. I told her I was the observer. The one who stayed quiet and kept the stories. She lit up at that. Said, I like people who notice things. That night, I went home and couldn't stop thinking about her. She didn't flirt much, but I felt seen. Not in the way dating often feels, like you're trying to sell yourself, but like she was gently lifting pieces of me out of a drawer and turning them over in her hands. We went on more dates. Always a little offbeat. A botanical garden on a rainy day. An experimental play where the actors sat among the audience. A used record store in an alleyway I didn't know existed. She always had questions. What kind of silence do you prefer? Do you think people are more honest when they whisper? I told her she should write a book. She said she was working on something. A grad thesis. Sociology. Something about digital intimacy and how people present themselves in constructed spaces. I didn't think much of it. I liked that she was smart, that she was in grad school, that she had this whole world of thought I didn't fully understand. It made her feel magnetic. The relationship didn't move fast. We kissed, held hands, spent hours talking, but she always kept some distance. She never invited me to her place. Said it was messy, chaotic, not a good space. I didn't push. I liked the mystery. I told myself it was part of the charm. But something started to feel strange. She never slipped. Never mentioned a friend's name twice. Never talked about her family. Her stories were always self-contained. Polished. Like essays that had been revised just enough to feel spontaneous. One night, I asked her what she'd been like in high school. She paused. Then said, "I've been a lot of people." It was cryptic, but I let it go. A few weeks later, I met her classmates. A few of us went out for drinks after an art show. She introduced me to 3 people, Jalen, Rue, and Marlo. All also grad students. All a little too charming. A little too interested in me. They asked a lot of questions. How we met. What I liked about Eris. What I thought intimacy meant in the age of data. I chalked it up to them being academic types. Philosophical. Curious. But when I got home that night, something didn't sit right. The way they looked at each other when I talked. The way they nodded when I mentioned specific conversations Eris and I had had, as if they already knew. I started Googling. At first, I just looked up her name. Nothing unusual. Her LinkedIn. A faculty page. A short blog post about sociology and the shifting self. Then I found it. A Reddit thread. Buried in our /AskAcademia. Someone had posted a question about ethical limits in sociology research. The top comment was from a throwaway account, describing a graduate project involving a composite dating profile. Multiple students taking turns running it, collecting data from matches, studying response patterns, recording emotional disclosures, analyzing how people constructed intimacy with a persona that didn't really exist. The poster said they were disturbed by how far it had gone. That one of the participants had started feeling bad because the subject, me, was getting emotionally attached. My stomach dropped. I went back to the post and read it again. Slowly. 3 times. The timeline matched. The details matched. The questions Eris had asked me, word for word, were listed as emotional escalation cues. I didn't sleep that night. The next day I texted her. No reply. I called. Straight to voicemail. So I went to the university. I didn't know what I was looking for. Just needed to see something real. Proof that she existed in the way I thought she did. I found the sociology department. Found her name on a shared office door. Knocked. No answer. But taped to the door was a flyer. A symposium. Graduate research presentations. One of the titles, Constructed Intimacy, a participatory study of perceived digital authenticity. Author, Eris L. and team. I walked out of that building in a daze. I wasn't dating Eris. I was participating in her thesis. I was a data point, a narrative arc, a controlled variable in a well-designed project. I didn't confront her. What would I even say? How many of you were I talking to? Which version of you said she liked my laugh when I went off script? Instead, I deleted everything. Her texts, her photos, her playlists, her candle from the botanical garden. But I couldn't delete the way she made me feel. The way she'd tilt her head when I said something vulnerable. The way she once whispered, "You make me want to be real." Was that her? Or Rue? Or Marlo? Or was it just a line they wrote together in a Google Doc? I spiraled for a while. Not in a dramatic way. Just quietly. I stopped dating. Stopped texting people back. I started second-guessing every connection I made. Wondering if I was being observed. Measured. Archived. The worst part? Sometimes I missed her. Not the real her, because I don't know who that was. But the version I built in my head. The girl in the yellow coat. The one who said, Ask me something strange. Now, when people ask why I'm cautious in relationships, I don't have a tidy explanation. I just say I've been researched. Because what do you call it when someone maps your mind and then walks away with the data? Not heartbreak. Not betrayal. Just extraction. This all started during one of those say yes to everything phases. You know the kind. I wasn't trying to reinvent myself or anything dramatic like that. I just got tired of saying no and then wondering why my life felt like it was on mute. So I said yes. Yes to staying out late. Yes to the after-work drinks even when I was dead tired. Yes to letting my friends set me up on Hinge for the 6th time. Yes to the extra side of fries. Yes to maybe being a little softer again. And 4 days into that minor identity crisis, I matched with Senna. Her first message was about a book in one of my profile pictures. Not a generic cool book, but an actual question. A weirdly specific one that only someone who had read it would know to ask. That alone made her stand out. Most people swipe based on vibes and then open with a fire emoji or hey. She didn't. She asked about whether I thought the protagonist had actually changed or just learned to narrate his damage better. Her photos were the kind that made you pause, not because she was trying to be hot, but because she looked like herself. Like someone who didn't need to edit her freckles or pose for the algorithm. One photo had her at an art exhibit, staring into some abstract mess of shapes. Another on a bike in a forest trail, hair wind-messed, cheeks flushed. A few mirror selfies, her hair always a little mussed, nail polish always chipped. She looked like someone who had better things to do than pretend. Her profile said she worked at a boutique candle shop and painted on weekends. It had this artsy, grounded energy that felt like real life, more brushstrokes than filters. We started talking. A lot. She had this way of making you feel like you already knew her. Like the conversations you were having were just continuations of ones you'd started in a dream. She didn't do small talk. She wanted to know what kind of kid I had been, what moment in my life had changed me the most, what I dreamed about when I was too tired to be productive. I remember thinking, finally, someone who wasn't afraid to get under the surface. Our first date was a random Wednesday night. She showed up in an oversized denim jacket with dried paint on the sleeve and brought me a tiny candle she'd made herself. It smelled like orange peel and sandalwood. She said she mixed it based on my vibe. I laughed and asked how she knew my vibe before we'd even met in person. She smirked and said, "I read between things." We walked through a little downtown strip not far from my place. She asked a lot of questions, made direct eye contact the whole time. It didn't feel like an interview. It felt like being memorized. At one point, we passed a man playing the violin on the street corner, and she just stopped. Not to listen, just to close her eyes. "This is how I want to be remembered," she said, with sound in the background and my eyes closed. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. The more we hung out, the more intense things got. Not dramatic, just emotionally, heavy. She'd send me long texts at 2 a.m., paragraphs about how lucky she felt to have met me, how she could already see our future. She'd say things like, "I've never felt this level of closeness before." Normally, that kind of intensity would have freaked me out. But with her, it felt kind of good. Like maybe I was finally with someone who wasn't afraid of connection. About a month in, she introduced me to her roommate, Kala. Senna had mentioned her a bunch, said they'd been friends since college. Both artists. Both the kind of people who didn't go out much. Kala was quiet, a little withdrawn, but kind. We all hung out a few times. Usually just sitting on their faded couch, surrounded by candles and mismatched throw pillows, listening to music and eating snacks. It felt cozy, almost too cozy, like a scene that had been rehearsed. I didn't start getting uneasy until a random Sunday afternoon. Senna and I were lying on the floor of her room, talking about childhood memories. I mentioned offhandedly that my dad had been diagnosed with something a few years back. Nothing fatal, but chronic. It had shifted a lot in our family dynamic. I didn't even go into detail, just said it changed things. She got quiet, not uncomfortable, not sad, quiet like something had clicked. That night, she sent me a long message that started with, "I think this is fate." She said being with me during a time of emotional transition made her feel like she had a role to play. That's the word that stuck with me. Role. After that, the tone of our relationship shifted. She started asking more questions about my health. Not in a caring way, in a curious way. She asked if I'd ever been really sick, She started sending me poems about grief, links to articles about resilience, stories about couples where one person died young, leaving the other behind to carry their memory. It wasn't creepy. Not at first. Just intense. Then Kala pulled me aside. We were in the kitchen, and Senna was in the shower. She handed me a mug of tea and said very quietly, "You should know that Senna has a pattern." I asked what she meant. She looked down. She's drawn to people in crisis. Still, I didn't get it. I said, "Everyone has a type, right?" "No," she said. "She doesn't want love. She wants legacy. She wants to be the person people remember when things fall apart." Then she told me, the last guy Senna dated had leukemia. The one before that had been diagnosed with early onset MS. The one before that. His parents died in a car crash within 6 months of each other. All of her relationships had a through line. She wasn't looking for a partner. She was looking for proximity to pain. Senna wanted to be the girl who stayed. The one who stood at the edge of tragedy and didn't blink. The last love. The one people write about in journals and eulogies. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to think that the candle-scent girl, the one who made me laugh during thunderstorms and kissed my collarbone like it was sacred, was playing a part. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Everything started clicking into place. The way she'd react when I mentioned being tired or stressed, lighting up slightly, like she was preparing for a scene. The way she'd sigh after I opened up, like she was checking something off a list. I confronted her. Not with rage, just with curiosity. I asked her why she was drawn to sadness. She didn't deny it. She just said, "Grief brings out the purest love. You only know what love is when you're running out of time." That's when I knew this wasn't about me. This was about her. About her need to be immortalized in someone else's story. She wasn't preparing for a relationship. She was preparing for a finale. I stopped seeing her after that. No big blowout. No drama. I just stopped texting. Stopped visiting. She didn't chase me. Maybe she already knew the ending wouldn't be satisfying if I didn't have something tragic hanging over me. Now, when I think about her, it's not with anger. More like confusion. Or maybe pity. How does someone get so tangled in sadness that they turn it into a blueprint for connection? I still have the candle she gave me. The one that was supposed to match my vibe. I don't light it anymore. But I keep it tucked in a drawer. As a reminder. Some people aren't looking for love. They're looking for a story. And they'll write you into it whether you agree to be a character or not. It started like most of my dating stories do, quietly with a small decision I didn't think much about at the time. I was bored on a Thursday night, scrolling through Instagram in bed, when I got tired of seeing the same engagement announcements and beach trip highlights. So, almost without thinking, I reinstalled a dating app I'd deleted 3 months earlier. Again, I told myself it was just to pass the time. Just to look. I wasn't even feeling lonely, just a little numb. And sometimes, matching with strangers felt like a way to remember that I was still allowed to want things. That's when I matched with Riven. He wasn't flashy. Not the kind of guy whose profile made you go, "Wow," but the kind that made you pause. Clean-shaven in some photos, a short beard in others. Always well-lit, clear shots, no mirror selfies, no shirtless gym pics, no captions about being a real man. He looked stable. Solid. Like the kind of person who knew how to parallel park on the first try and had opinions about thread counts. His prompts were low-key. One said, "I'll never say no to a smoothie on a hot day," and another simply read, "Looking for someone who gets the joke before the punchline." It was nothing revolutionary, but it felt refreshingly normal. Like he wasn't trying to sell anything. No curated quirkiness. Just a guy. He messaged me first. Something about my profile song being a throwback masterpiece. It was Criminal by Fiona Apple. He sent a voice memo mimicking the intro with exaggerated drama, and I laughed. It wasn't a big laugh, but it was real. That was enough to keep talking. We started slow. Banter mostly. He was funny, not in the performative, meme-quoting way a lot of guys are, but in a low-simmer way. He noticed little things. Asked what my favorite cereal said about my personality. Sent me a link to a niche documentary after I mentioned I liked weird rabbit holes. Our first date was a walk around the reservoir near where I lived. We got smoothies, of course. He teased me about my order, banana mango, basic as hell, and offered to trade sips. I said no, but he smiled like he already knew I'd say that. We sat on a bench near the water, talking about the dumbest things, bad reality TV, the ethics of tipping at self-checkout, whether or not the moon has a personality. It felt easy. Not electric, not overwhelming, just easy. And after a string of situationships that had felt like emotional roller coasters powered by red flags and wishful thinking, easy felt like a miracle. We kept seeing each other. Always low-key. Food trucks, movie nights, spontaneous grocery store runs. He had this way of making everyday things feel like rituals. He'd text to say he was thinking of me when he saw a dog that looked like mine. He sent me Spotify playlists that somehow matched my brainwaves. He remembered the name of my high school best friend, stuff most people glossed over. But then I noticed something. The first time was at dinner. I ordered a salad, not because I was trying to impress him, but because I was craving something green after 3 days of eating like an unsupervised teenager. When the food came, he looked at my plate and smiled. "No wonder you're glowing tonight." I laughed. It sounded like a compliment. The second time was when we met up after work, and I casually mentioned I'd skipped lunch. He leaned in, brushed my hair behind my ear, and said, "You look amazing, by the way. That effortless kind of pretty." Again, a compliment, right? But then it kept happening. Every time I mentioned not eating, or eating less, he'd light up. Not obviously. Not in a red alert kind of way. But his posture would shift. He'd get more affectionate. He'd say things like, "You're my dream girl." Low maintenance and naturally hot. One night, after I told him I'd just eaten chips for dinner, he said, "See, this is why I like you. You're not obsessed with food like some people. You're just chill." That word chill. He said it like it was a prize. Like being chill about food made me desirable. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, who doesn't like compliments? Who doesn't want to be told they're attractive? Especially by someone who seems to genuinely enjoy your company. But something about it started to stick in my brain. I found myself remembering his tone. The way his eyes lit up when I said I wasn't hungry. The way he'd wrap his arms around me and say, "You're so tiny. I could fit you in my pocket." That's when it started to bother me. Because here's the thing, I've never had a great relationship with food. I wasn't diagnosed with anything. I wasn't in recovery. But I'd spent years absorbing messages about beauty and worth and control. I grew up watching my mom skip breakfast and call it discipline. I read magazines that told me 10 pounds was the difference between love and loneliness. I knew the rules. Eat less. Be less. Take up less space. I thought I was past that. But with Riven it was different. He never told me to eat less. He never said I was prettier when I was hungry. But he didn't have to. He smiled more when I said I hadn't eaten. He complimented me more when I ordered less. He made me feel like the version of me that skipped meals was the version he loved most. That's when it started to change. I stopped eating breakfast. Not on purpose at first. I just forgot. Then I started skipping lunch, too. I told myself I was busy. I told myself I'd eat later. But I liked how he looked at me when I was lightheaded. I liked how he held me tighter when I said I was tired. I liked feeling wanted. But my body didn't. I was exhausted. Cold all the time. My skin broke out. My mood swung like a pendulum. I'd stare at food and think, if he saw me eat this, would he still say I looked radiant? I tried to talk to my roommate about it. Told her I thought maybe Riven was, I don't know, encouraging something. She blinked at me and said, "Wait, Riven? But he's so nice." And he was. That's what made it so hard. A few months in, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I was scrolling Reddit late at night, some thread about toxic dating patterns, and I found a comment that described exactly what I was going through. Word for word. It said, "I dated a guy who never told me not to eat, but made me feel loved when I didn't. He called it discipline. I called it survival." My chest tightened. I started searching. I don't know why I hadn't before. Maybe I didn't want to know. But once I started, I couldn't stop. I found an old blog. A woman named Kira. She was Riven's ex. The blog hadn't been updated in a while, but the posts were still up. Raw. Painful. Honest. She wrote about a relationship with someone who praised her when she lost weight, who pulled away when she ate normally, who made her feel like she had to earn love by shrinking. She never said his name, but the details lined up. The timing. The city. The way he said, "You're glowing," after she skipped dinner. The way he'd smile when she ordered a side salad. I felt sick. I didn't confront him. I couldn't, because I knew how the conversation would go. He'd say I was reading into things, that he never told me to stop eating, that he was just being supportive, that I was imagining it. And maybe I was. But maybe I wasn't. Instead, I just disappeared. I stopped answering his texts, stopped picking up his calls. I blocked him on everything. I didn't owe him a scene.